Hi, welcome back to the Latino Paradox. I'm Ruben Navarrette, joined by Arnold Torres. And our topic today is a topic that the whole country's talking about, sexual harassment. It started, where did this start, Arnold? We've had a conversation in this country about sexual harassment that's ramped up. You could say it started in 1991 with the Clarence Thomas Anita Hill hearings. There was a lot of discussion then. We skipped a lot of it during the Bill Clinton era. We talked about it a little bit, but not fully, I would argue. And now, man, the floodgates have opened up in the last year and a half with stories about media figures, Hollywood figures. Every single day there's another terrible story about an actor, a director, producer behaving badly in Hollywood, liberal members of the media. I knew things were bad, Arnold, when one of the bad guys turned out to be the vice president of news for NPR. Okay? When the perverts have invaded NPR, you know you got a story here. And here in California, we're not immune to this because one of the stories that people in California have been watching involves State Senator Tony Mendoza and accusations by former fellows of the California legislature, former staffers and aides, all fitting the profile, young women who say that he invited them into hotel rooms, into his house and apartment, and made inappropriate suggestions, overtures to them. So, Arnold, let's get to the core of it. In terms of the questions we try to answer here in the Latino Paradox, how did we get here? What does this whole thing tell us about the paradox that Latino officials, in this case, people like Tony Mendoza, face? And why are we having this discussion now?
Well, I think we're having it now because, as you've said, it kind of finally hit a boiling point. Society has gone through a great deal. These episodes, as you said, are not new to us, certainly not in the California State Legislature. They've been happening since Willie Brown, probably certainly before because they weren't reported before. But it does go to show you how pervasive this difficulty is in a world society, with some exceptions. I'm sure I haven't been to every country in the world, but it's the male domination of world society and culture. And I think it's that pervasive, and I think it's that powerful that it actually stops people and women from being able to speak. That fear is something unbelievable. It is a fear that we all go through as minorities, but when you're a woman, you are confronting more than at times double jeopardy. So I think we get here because of these very, very overarching factors. And I think that the only reason we're dealing with it now, at least to this point, is because it is so constant. It just, the revelations, as you said, never stop. They keep coming from all quarters. The big challenge will be for what will Latinos do, if anything? Will we be different? We come from a culture that everybody has stereotyped as being so dominant driven, the whole macho mentality, as it's even creeped into the lexicon of English speakers and Hollywood. So what will we do? That's a real big question that we have to address shortly.
You mentioned the idea of fear and why it is that women haven't spoken up to this point. That is often one thing that's brought up. You're right. We're confronted now. I've lost count, dozens total accusations in Hollywood of movie stars and folks in the media and elsewhere, and I find them all credible. Now that may sound strange, but I do. I don't think that, despite the fact that the accused always like to point to those rare cases where somebody like the Duke lacrosse team is accused of rape and it didn't happen, they didn't do it. In this case, those are rare cases, and in this case. When I look at all the various instances, there's very little upside for women to come forward and go public with things like this. And I am inclined to believe, having spent 25 years around politicians at every level, I find these stories very credible. I find that when you have an element of power and you're an older man over a younger woman like this, that you mentioned the idea of fear. What I have heard just recently, it's not just a fear of being blackballed, of not being able to find another job, of having people retaliate against you. We're talking about this because of Judge Roy Moore, which is the big national story, obviously. You have the Senate candidate, Republican Senate candidate from Alabama, who's been confronted with allegations of a particular perverse and ugly form of this, which is predatory behavior toward young girls, which is really in a different category. And the question there is, well, why did these people come forward sooner? Well, if you believe some of the accounts, he threatened them basically and said, nobody will ever believe you. Nobody will believe you. I'm the so-and-so. I have a position. I have power. They're going to take my word over yours. And don't forget, oftentimes these women sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, with members of Congress after they reach a settlement, a private settlement. And this is where I think the final point that deserves addressing. This now has reached the halls of Congress, as well it should, because there was testimony just yesterday by Congresswoman Jackie Spears and others that basically pointed the finger at male members of Congress in both parties, in Democrats and Republicans, who are sitting members of Congress right now who've been accused of sexual harassment. In one case, the story was told of a congressman who invited a young staffer to his apartment to drop off some paperwork, and she shows up and he's in a towel.
Yeah.
And then according to her, he takes off the towel. I find amazing that this is bipartisan, that's Republicans and Democrats, and that there are these little pockets like members of Congress who have been able to protect themselves for so long. So my question to you, and in terms of where we go from here and what this means for the paradox, where you have Latinos have all this numbers, all this presence, but very little political power, what do you think what does it call upon Latino politicians to do, those leaders of ours, in terms of addressing this issue and reinstilling public confidence that we're not going to take this lightly?
Well, I think in the political arena, we have to make sure that we don't have double standards. One standard for Democrats and one standard for Republicans. I think the biggest difficulty was Bill Clinton. I think with what he did in the White House, the best thing for Bill Clinton to have done back then was to have resigned. That's what he should have done, because he had brought such shame to the presidency of the United States of America. This shouldn't have started just with Roy Moore. Roy Moore, as you said, is at another level. But the levels, I mean, Jesus, think about that. We're talking about levels, what may be more offensive and less offensive. But I think for Latinos specifically, as evidenced by the Clinton issue and the tendency that we have to always judge Democrats much softer than we do Republicans. We have to now recognize that we're going to have to be sitting in a degree of judgment legally of what Latino politicians do. That means that we cannot protect our own anymore. That means that we've got to look to the principle and the integrity of the issue. Are we protecting women's rights? Are we protecting men's rights if they're harassed? Because we do have cases of men being harassed by other men and even women. So this is the real colorblind test for Latinos. This is a colorblind. We've always talked about people treating us fairly. Well, now it's our responsibility, because we're ascending to political power, for us to be able to do the same for everyone else. This is very, very important, because this will be the height of hypocrisy for us, since we've complained and had legitimacy in being treated so unfairly on so many different levels, when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to opportunity, when it comes to the same things that women are seeking.
Very good point. You know, we understand the Latino community, the concept of racial harassment. The idea of being harassed as men because of our race, all the various things that are told, the jokes that are said, the teasing that endures, you know, all the various, the creating of a hostile work environment for the Latino firemen, the Latino policemen, when they were breaking these barriers. And so I think there's a special place in hell for Latino elected officials who engage in sexual harassment for a couple of reasons. One is you ought to know better. Because just because we're talking about sexual harassment as opposed to racial harassment, you know what it's like, or you should know what it's like, when somebody in a position of power keeps you down and degrades you, as it degrades you and humiliates you, as a way of putting you in your place. You know better. And secondly, and I say this about Latino elected officials in Sacramento and elsewhere, every time they're pulled over for drunk driving, every time there's a scandal involving taxes, every time there's a scandal involving fundraising, every time there's a scandal that they're involved in with sexual harassment or the like, or an issue of infidelity, for that matter. Whatever it is that they get involved in, they have to understand that they're not in the same league as that group that you and I affectionately refer to as the white man. They are not in a position to get 1 or 2 or 3 bites out of the apple, okay? I'm talking to you, Tony Mendoza. Your last name is not Kennedy. You were not born Tony Kennedy, okay? You're not a Kennedy. You were not born a Hyannisport. You don't get 1, 2, 3 tries of the apple. If you're measuring yourself by the Ted Kennedy standard, where you get many, many tries, you're in the wrong business. So that's one of the reasons I think Latinos have to take this especially seriously. And I know we in our community are hopefully waking up to that thanks to the events of the last few weeks. Thank you, folks, for joining us on the Latino Paradox. Thank you to Arnold Torres. I'm Ruben Navarrette. Until next time.